Someone is talking in the next room. You can't quite hear the words, just the rhythm of voices dropping lower, the soft pause before a name is said. And something inside you leans in, not because you decided to, but because you couldn't help it. That pull, quiet, instinctive, almost shameful, is one of the most human things about us. We call it gossip. We say it's small. We say it's beneath us. But what if it isn't? What if that moment of leaning in, that hunger to know what is being said about whom, is not a weakness at all, but something far older, far deeper, and far more necessary than we ever allowed ourselves to admit? For most of human history, survival was not a solo act. We did not make it through the cold, the hunger, or the danger alone. We survived in groups, small, tight bands of people who depended on each other for food, protection, and warmth. And in those groups, the most dangerous thing was not a predator waiting in the dark. It was a person you could not trust. Imagine living in a group of 50 people. You cannot watch everyone all the time. You cannot follow every person into the forest, witness every decision they make, test every intention they carry, and yet your life depends on knowing who shares fairly, who takes more than they give, who is loyal when things get hard, and who disappears when the danger comes. This is where gossip was born, not as entertainment, not as cruelty, but as information, the kind of social information that helped people navigate a world where one wrong alliance could cost you everything. The evolutionary psychologist Robin Dunbar, who spent decades studying human social behavior, proposed that language itself may have developed partly for this reason, not just to coordinate hunts or describe the landscape, but to talk about people, to share what we knew, what we suspected, and what we had seen. In other words, to gossip. His research suggested that around 2/3 of human conversation, even today, is about social topics. Who was doing what? Who said what? Who can be trusted and who cannot? That number is not a sign of shallowness. It is a fossil, a trace of something our ancestors depended on to stay alive. Think about what it would have meant in those early groups to know that a certain person had been seen taking food that wasn't theirs, or that someone had abandoned their duties during a difficult night. That information, passed quietly between two people, then three, then the whole group, functioned as a kind of social immune system. It identified threats before they became crises. It protected the group from the inside. And there was something else gossip did, something just as important. It taught people what was acceptable. Long before anyone wrote down rules or built courts or created institutions, gossip was the mechanism that enforced community standards. You didn't steal, not only because it was wrong, but because people would talk. Your reputation, the story the group told about you, was, in many ways, your most valuable possession. Lose it, and you could lose everything else. A young woman once told me she grew up in a small village where everyone knew everyone. She said the thing that kept people honest wasn't fear of punishment. It was something quieter, the awareness that by evening your choices would be part of the conversation. That awareness shaped behavior more reliably than any formal rule ever could. Gossip, then, at its origin, was not noise. It was signal, a deeply human signal that said, pay attention to the people around you, because they are the world you live in. Something changed when human groups grew larger. For thousands of years, those small bands of 50 or so people had managed social life through direct experience. You knew your group members personally. You had watched them, worked beside them, eaten with them. Your knowledge of others was built from contact, slow, repeated, real. But groups began to expand. Villages formed, then towns, then cities, and suddenly you were surrounded by people you had never met, people whose histories you didn't know, people whose characters you could not read from memory or shared experience. The old system, watch, observe, remember, could no longer keep up. Gossip adapted. It became less about direct witness and more about shared reputation. You no longer needed to have seen something yourself. Someone you trusted had seen it, and they told someone, and that someone told you. A network of social knowledge spread outward, connecting people who had never spoken directly, building a picture of the community that no single person could have assembled alone. This is when gossip began to function less like private information and more like a shared language, a system through which a group constantly updated its understanding of itself. Anthropologists who study traditional societies have noted that in many communities, reputation management through social talk is not informal at all. It follows patterns. There are people who are trusted as reliable sources. There are topics that are considered appropriate for open discussion and others that circulate only in certain circles. The flow of social information has structure, even when no one has designed that structure consciously. It simply forms the way water finds its path. And within that system, belonging became tied to participation. To be part of a group was not just to live among people. It was to be woven into their conversations. When people talked about you, even in small ways, it meant you existed in the social fabric. You mattered enough to be mentioned. Your name in someone else's mouth was, in a strange way, a form of presence. This created something powerful and slightly uncomfortable, the need not only to be known, but to be known well. People began managing the stories that circulated about them with the same care they gave to more visible aspects of their lives. A good reputation was something built quietly, over time, through the slow accumulation of what others said when you weren't in the room. A man who had worked for decades in a small trading community once described it this way. He said the actual quality of your goods mattered, of course. But what spread faster and lasted longer was the story people told about whether you were someone worth dealing with. He hadn't thought of that as gossip. He had thought of it as trust. But the mechanism was the same. Gossip had become the infrastructure of social life. Invisible, constant, and load-bearing. Not a disruption to the system, but the system itself. Quietly holding the weight of how communities understood, evaluated, and connected with one another. But a tool that powerful was never going to stay clean. The same mechanism that protected communities. The flow of social information, the constant murmur of who did what, who said what, who could be trusted, carried within it something that could turn without warning. Because gossip does not only travel between people who are careful, or fair, or kind. It travels between people who are afraid, who are jealous, who are hurt, who want something they don't have. And in those hands, it becomes something else entirely. The information doesn't change, the structure doesn't change, but the intention does. What begins as a neutral observation? Someone noticed something, someone mentioned it, can be quietly shaped before it moves to the next person. A detail is left out, a tone is added. A small truth is wrapped in a larger implication, and by the time it reaches the fifth person, it no longer resembles what it started as. It has become a story, and stories, once released, cannot be called back. This is the hidden cost that lives inside gossip's usefulness. The same speed that made it valuable, the way information could move through a group faster than any individual could carry it, also makes it dangerous. Damage travels at the same speed as protection. And unlike a direct accusation, which can be faced and answered, gossip moves in the background, where it cannot easily be challenged, corrected, or stopped. There is a particular cruelty in this. When someone speaks against you openly, you know who spoke and what was said. You have something to respond to. But when a story about you circulates quietly, shifting slightly with each telling, gathering weight as it moves, you often don't know it exists until the damage is already done. People have already formed their opinions. The distance has already appeared in their eyes, and you are left trying to correct something you never fully saw. A woman once described losing a friendship she had valued for years. She never received an explanation. The other person simply grew colder over weeks, then stopped responding entirely. Much later, through someone else, she learned that a misunderstanding, a few words taken out of context, passed through 3 or 4 people, had grown into something unrecognizable. By the time it reached her friend, it no longer carried any trace of the original moment. It had become a different story about a different version of her. She said the hardest part wasn't the loss, it was the helplessness. The story had already lived its life without her. This is where gossip breaks the very thing it was built to protect. Social bonds are formed through shared understanding, through the sense that the people around you see you clearly and fairly. Gossip, when it distorts, does not just damage reputation. It erodes the feeling of being truly known. It replaces the real person with a rumor, and the real person has no say in which one people choose to believe. The tool does not care who it protects and who it destroys. It only knows how to move. At some point, we stopped calling it gossip, not because it disappeared, but because it grew so large, so woven into the structures of daily life that it became invisible. It put on different clothes, moved into different rooms, and we gave it different names: news, reviews, commentary, content. And in those new forms, we consumed it without the slight guilt that the word gossip used to carry. Consider the modern workplace. Research consistently shows that a significant portion of office conversation involves talk about colleagues, their performance, their relationships, their standing with management. One study estimated that employees spend roughly 65% of their conversation time on social topics, mirroring almost exactly the patterns researchers had observed in traditional societies. The setting had changed completely. The behavior had not moved at all. And then came social media, and gossip found the most efficient distribution system it had ever known. What once required physical proximity, a lowered voice, a trusted ear, now required only a screen in a few seconds. Information about people, true and untrue, flattering and devastating, could reach thousands before the subject had any awareness it was moving. The speed that had always been gossip's defining quality became something almost incomprehensible in scale, and the distance between speaker and subject, once a village, once a town, became, effectively, the entire connected world. But something else happened alongside the acceleration. Gossip became a product. Entire industries built themselves on the human appetite for social information. Celebrity culture, reality television, true crime, influencer drama. These formats are structurally identical to what happened around a fire 10,000 years ago. Someone telling a group of people about someone else's life, choices, failures, and secrets. The emotional pull is the same. The need being fed is the same. Only the packaging has changed and the profit attached to it. A young man who spent several years working in digital media described watching analytics in real time. He said the numbers were unmistakable. Stories about what people did, their scandals, their conflicts, their private lives made public, consistently outperformed stories about ideas, discoveries, or events. The audience didn't need to be told what to care about. They already knew. They had always known. This normalization is not, in itself, a condemnation. It is simply an honest picture of what gossip has always been, not an aberration that polished societies outgrow, but a permanent feature of how humans process social life together. The form changes. The need does not. What normalization does, however, is remove the friction, the small discomfort that once accompanied gossip, the awareness that you were doing something that required justification, fades when the behavior is embedded in systems, platforms, and industries that treat it as entirely neutral. When gossip becomes content, the question of whether it should be shared stops feeling like a question at all. And so we participate, most of us, without quite noticing. Scrolling, clicking, sharing, watching, feeding the same ancient hunger that once kept our ancestors informed, connected, and alive, just with considerably better lighting. When you look at gossip honestly, not the word but the thing itself, what you find underneath is not pettiness. What you find is longing. Every act of gossip, however small, however sharp, carries within it a fundamental human need to understand other people, and through understanding them, to locate yourself among them. To know who is trusted and who is not. To know where the edges of the group are, and whether you are safely inside them. To know in the most basic sense that you are not alone in a world full of other minds you cannot directly see into. This is not a shallow need. It is one of the deepest needs we carry. We are, at our core, creatures who cannot survive without reading each other, not just for physical safety, though that came first, but for something harder to name. The sense that the people around us know who we are, that we exist, fully and accurately, in someone else's understanding. There is a particular kind of loneliness that has nothing to do with being physically alone. It is the loneliness of being misread, misrepresented, or simply unseen. And gossip, in its strange way, is a response to that fear, both a cause of it and an attempt to escape it. When we talk about others, we are also always talking about ourselves. The qualities we notice in other people, the behaviors we find worth mentioning, the judgments we carry quietly and share selectively. These are maps of our own values, our own fears, our own unresolved questions about how to live. When someone says, with that particular careful tone, "Did you hear what she did?" they are not simply reporting information. They are reaching for something. Confirmation, perhaps, or connection, or the relief of knowing that someone else sees what they see, feels what they feel, draws the same line in the same place. Gossip is, in this sense, a search for shared reality. And perhaps that is why it has never weakened, never faded, never been educated or moralized out of existence. Because the need it serves is not a flaw in our design. It is the design. We are built to be interested in each other. Obsessively, endlessly, sometimes uncomfortably interested. And that interest, however imperfectly expressed, is the root of everything we have ever built together. The question worth sitting with is not why do we gossip? We have always known the answer, even when we pretended otherwise. The question is what we do with the awareness, whether we let the mechanism run on its oldest, most automatic settings, or whether, knowing what it is and where it comes from, we bring something more deliberate to it, more care in what we pass forward, more pause before we let a story about someone else travel further than it deserves. Not because gossip is always wrong, but because the people we talk about are real, and the stories we tell about them shape the world they have to live in. We are the species that survived, in part because we learned to talk about each other. The least we can do is try to do it well. Until next time, my friends, sleep well and stay curious.